Welcome everyone to a very special episode of the Buck Stops here. And of course, you can't have a show called the Buck Stops here without a buck. I'm that buck. It's a Canadian buck, so it's not worth what it used to be. But I'm talking to the Can-Am connection, really. He's a one-man Can-Am connection. Paul Lawrence, you've been in Canada as long as you've been in the United States.
Yes,
Oh,
that's true.
yeah,
I'm a person with two countries and no home country,
there you go. There you
as they
go.
say.
But like myself, Kirk Buchner, a Hall of Fame enthusiast. And that is what we're here to talk about because as we're sort of days approaching the NFL draft, and we're going to see a lot of future legends selected on this upcoming Thursday, we have in the last little while some major legends who have decided that they're going to hang up their cleats. Two of which from your team, and that's really what you wanted to talk about today. From your vaunted offensive line, the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Paul's a fan of the Cowboys. Some people will love that here, and some people will not. But he's a great guy, trust me.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, they're really there's not much of an off season when it comes to talking about the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but
Mm.
it's been quiet for a few months since we had the announcement of the class and all the controversy about that we talked about back in February with the class of 2025, and they'll be inducted, of course, in the ceremony in early August coming up here. But we're kind of in a quiet time, and there's things are being filled. The draft's going to assume a lot of the sports NFL media attention very soon. But it is a time of year, and it extends for a while when we start hearing about, the players that were on the field last year have decided to move on and retire, and that kind of news trickles in the off season and even into for a few of these players. We're going to talk about one in particular who doesn't seem to be able to make up his mind. That might be ongoing discussion for
That
many more
yes,
weeks, months, and maybe a few years, I
I,
suspect.
I was wondering if you wanted to bring him up because originally when you messaged me, it was about the two Cowboys. And then I said, well, I mean, there's two other big ones that we can talk about. And I didn't
Sure.
bring up that certain individual who I don't think, well, let's be cryptic like he is. So, but I guess that answers my question that I didn't ask you, but I was going to. So, but let's start off in your neck of the woods in Big D. I think the biggest name and the one with out of the four people we're going to talk about, well, for sure today, four who have retired,
Right.
someone who I think actually has the best chance. Uh, Although I think they all will eventually get in. One, I'm not so sure. Well, I think three of them are going to get in right away. Or not right away, but
Right.
relatively quick within 5 years. Zack Martin, an absolute beast that you had on the line. Unfortunately, 2024 was not his year. The injuries just compounded. He just decided he's not going to come back, and it's probably best for him and his quality of life. But you're the Cowboy. I want you. Well, not literally or figuratively, Cowboy fan.
Yes, there we go.
Good thing I majored in English. Huh? It's done me great. Good. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, Zack Martin, of all the players in the league, and of course where he sits in terms of the Cowboys in the last decade or so, we're looking at one of the premier players in the entire league, let alone along the offensive line and a position along that offensive line at offensive guard that probably doesn't get as much attention as the offensive tackles and other positions. But here's a guy who came into the league at a time when the Cowboys were sort of, I guess you'd say, sort of peak Tony Romo, had some teams there, but the offensive line needed to be rebuilt. A guy we're going to talk about in a minute was drafted before that. A center that retired a few years ago was there. So he kind of came in at a key need on the offensive line at a time when, yeah, Jerry Jones Cowboys were trying to get over that hump, which they still haven't, but they were trying.
Mm-hmm.
And if folks remember that draft, and it goes down in history as part of the legacy of Zack Martin, is that he fell to the Cowboys at a time when the allotted quarterback, Johnny Football, Johnny Manziel, was in that draft and was falling down the draft. And I remember watching it in live, and of course, everybody could see him falling. Everybody were talking about, will Jerry do it? Will Jerry do it? They had Romo. He was relatively healthy and had years to go, although that would change. But the temptation there with Jerry, right, is pick the big name here, the guy who played at Texas A&M, and all this. And it was all this discussion. And then when it landed at their spot, they're in the draft room. You hear all the speculation, all the picks coming in, and on this huge hype that they're going to pick Johnny Manziel, the quarterback. And of course, they didn't. They passed, and they picked an offensive lineman from the University of Notre Dame, who was a highly ranked player coming out of college, who had actually played, I think, a couple of different positions in college, but was targeted to be an offensive guard in the NFL, and that was Zack Martin. And, of course, the immediate and short-term draft criticism was, why in the heck did they pick a lineman? Why didn't they pick, Johnny Manziel or some other big high-profile position? Why waste a very high draft pick on an offensive guard? Well, very quickly it was determined that it was not only because of Johnny Manziel's career went quickly off the cliff with the Browns, but immediately Zack Martin, when it became a starter, a Pro Bowl player, an All-Pro selection, and that would continue for several years. Made the All-Decade team, even though he played about half of the decade in the 2010s. Actually has a shot to double it and be a member of the 2020 All-Decade team because he had success into this decade, except for, as you mentioned, last season, the injuries caught up to him. But a guy who was consistently ranked the top guard in the league for several years. He has multiple first-team All-Pros, a bunch of Pro Bowl selections, made that All-Decade team, and just had an outstanding career to the point where now that he's retired, or even a few years before that, people were talking about him being legitimately on the Mount Rushmore of offensive guards in NFL history. That's kind of the accolades that people view Zack Martin's career, and the consistency of it is just incredible and remarkable. And so kudos to a fantastic career. I think you're right. The injuries and then the opportunity, right, to retire at pretty much the top of your game is applaudable for a player, and we wish him very well. But yes, he is the first sort of predominant retirement from last season, and the 5-year wait would make him eligible for the class of 2030 over in the direction of my shoulder there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's he's well positioned. He sort of checks all the boxes. Guards can sometimes have a tough time. We know in the current pool, the last couple elections, right, we have two other members of the all-decade team in the 2010s, the guard position, that are now finalists, and both of them made it to the final 10. So they're well situated in only the first few years. It'd be interesting to see how their chances move forward in the coming years. But Zack Martin is well positioned to be a serious contender for first ballot in the class of 2030. And so that's a great accomplishment for any player to be thought of that way. Again, especially an offensive lineman.
Right. And to your point, that is the biggest name right now we know for 2030, despite some people who might be thinking, well, wait a minute, there was a couple big names that already retired. Well, we'll get there. Yeah. We're going to get there because some people may have forgotten a couple things. I know sometimes I forgot because I did wait, did they play it all this year? Because I have my little Hall of Fame monitor that I do and I update every year. By the way, you're going to be voluntold to be helping with that, because I want to make sure that I have the best Hall of Fame monitor in the whole country.
Oh, okay. There we go.
And the country of the United States, now that I live here, not Canada.
There you go.
I already had that.
Yeah, so if we want to continue on the 2030 for a little bit here, that is, there'll probably be some other players, but if you look at veterans across the league, again, sometimes you get surprised, retirements even into training camp and before season starts, of guys you don't expect. But there aren't a lot of other folks out there, but there are two that we probably should chat about who are possible. We don't know yet. They're currently essentially free agents, so they're not.
Well,
they're not
should
teams,
we stick with before we get there? Maybe Zack Martin's teammate for many years.
So we do have another more recent kind of contender for the Hall of Fame. That is his Dallas Cowboys teammate, Tyron Smith, an offensive tackle, announced just last week that he is retiring. He had played his whole career until last season with the Cowboys, and then he spent a season with the New York Jets. Now, here's a guy at the peak of his career, and he was drafted a few years before Zack Martin, and the center Travis Fitzpatrick was all Fitzgerald Travis was already there. But yeah, Tyron Smith in the first half of his career was a dominant force at offensive tackle. This guy is a massive human being. I mean,
Mhm.
when you see him stand against with his other fellow offensive linemen, and I've met him in person, he's just a massive, he's a great guy, very personable, great teammate, highly lauded coming out of college, and highly ranked and was a top high draft pick by the Cowboys. And the last 4 or 5 years, he struggled with injuries. He kind of bounced back and had a pretty decent season a couple of years ago with the Cowboys. I think he picked up another All-Pro. So he's got a handful of first-team All-Pro, some Pro Bowls, and he's also on the 2010 All-Decade team.
Mhm.
Not as lauded in terms of his overall career accomplishments as Zack Martin is, but still a very, very lauded player that had an outstanding career. Injuries really took a lot away from that in the last 4 or 5 years. There were seasons where he struggled to, because of various injuries, stay on the field. That was part of the reason why the Cowboys didn't re-sign him last offseason. I think he played 10 games with the Jets this year. And again, similar, I think, to thinking that Zack Martin, right? I mean, I've done everything I can in my career. I
Right.
want to retire healthy. They both have young families and accomplish everything. Neither one of them, unfortunately, even made it to a Super Bowl. But beyond that, they sort of both had outstanding careers, and they made a ton of money. They were among the highest paid
Mhm.
players at their positions in the last several years. So they're going to do just fine. His prospects for being first ballot are going to be a little tricky, I think, for a variety of reasons, which we're going to into the smaller class sizes, the fact that depending on who else is on that ballot, either returning or perhaps some other folks we're going to mention in a few minutes, and it's going to make it challenging for him. But certainly, when you look at other offensive tackles who are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, some of his fellow members of the 2010 All-Decade team. I mean, Joe Thomas is already in, but there are a couple other guys who are going to be on the ballot. The voters are going to have to take a while to sort out those 2010s All-Decade, which is interesting to note. It was an All-Decade team that didn't have a first team and a second team, which makes it hard to know how the voters might have weighed them. So there's 4 offensive tackles on that All-Decade team. And I think 3 of them plus a couple other guys are going to be considered. The voters like offensive tackles, especially on the left side, protecting the quarterback. So a lot of them are going to get attention. A lot of them have been elected. But then the other note is if you go back and look at all-decade teams in the 1960s and 1980s and the 1990s, there are offensive tackle on those teams like Richmond Webb and Joe Jacoby and Ralph Neely, who played for the Cowboys in the 60s when all-decade. They're not in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
So, there's going to be a little bit of a challenge there. But I think, given enough time as a modern candidate, he's a guy that eventually is going to find what I call his pathway through to be considered as a finalist and be elected. But it's likely going to take several years for that to happen, especially since I suspect there's going to be some other of his peer offensive tackles still on the ballot with him.
Well, and to your point that you made with the smaller class, I'm hoping, because I like to think I'm that eternal optimist here, that they're going to course correct by then. I think that when they see the lack of interest, maybe this year, I don't know about, I think you told me that you're not going to go.
No, I'm not going this year.
I'm not either. Neither, I don't think Chris is, sort of a core group of people who are going. I know Ron's not, which is actually not surprising. Ron's done so much, but the lack of interest is going to be there. I think it'll be different next year if you have a small class and it's led by Drew Brees.
Yeah.
That's a different story, but we will see what they do. I mean, hell, just running a mock committee like I do, and I can't seem to make people happy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked about this at length. For years, there were large classes as large as 7, 8, 9, and then the Centennial class. There was a lot of pushback by Deion Sanders, other Hall of Famers, and members of the media, and we suspect some voters. So the Hall made that really kind of swing to another extreme last year in revamping the rules, which we've talked about it
Right.
quite a bit of time. But it did result, and our good friend Jack Silverstein did the math and
Mhm.
was telling everybody last fall, don't expect to see a class of 5 moderns, which had been pretty much standard under the rules for many years. They would fill all 5 of those slots. Expect fewer. I think some of us were maybe overly optimistic. We see 4 modern. Well, it turned out there were only 3 plus 1 senior, so a class of 4. That's the smallest class we've seen in 20 years. Probably an overcorrection. The voters and some other in the media have been really hard on the Hall, as many of us have been thinking that that's just gone too extreme. My understanding is the Hall is reluctant to make a shift after 1 year. So I suspect for the
Mhm.
class of 2026, the math is likely going to end up with a class of 4, maybe 5, including a combination of modern, senior, and coach contributors, which is still going to be a small class. But I think you're right. I think they're getting enough pressure from folks to be rethinking long term because it creates this massive backlog when you have deserving players being added to the pool, waiting in the pool. And if you just elect 1 or 2 fewer moderns a year, which is really what we experienced this year, it may not seem like a lot, but it just makes that queue get bigger and longer. And I can
Right.
show, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Here we go. And what this, oh, I can't. You'd have to give me permission
All right.
to
Let's
send it.
oh, here we go. Is requesting. Look at we're doing this here on the fly. All right, we've got a presentation here.
So
What do we got?
let's take a look over here first. So this is just the first ballot eligibility coming up, and we won't go through all this. We got lots of time in the next several years. And you're seeing 2026, right? We've got some really, you see the list there?
Yep, I do.
Yeah, we got some high profile players like Drew Brees and Larry Fitzgerald. And then 2027, you've got Ben Roethlisberger, Adrian Peterson, Rob Gronkowski. And then you go down 2028, you got Tom Brady and JJ Watt. 29, we got Aaron Donald, Jason Kelsey. And then, as you see, we've already been talking about a couple guys for 2030. My point here is you can very quickly, just on first ballot, see 2 or even 3 solid contenders in many of these years,
Mhm.
which means it's just going to be really challenging for other folks to break through. And let me show you what that looks like in kind of just a mock up. And you could do a lot of this kind of playing around with scenarios to show you kind of what we're facing, right? Um, when you have a situation where if this is just a couple different scenarios, if we just stay at 3 modern, maybe we get Breeze and Larry Fitzgerald in next year. Maybe a guy like Luke Kuechly or Adam Vinatieri jumps in. Oh, there's your 3. Boom. And then you go down that list and you can see first ballot guys dropping in there. You see guys like Isaac Holt, Terry Holt, excuse me, and Darren Woodson and some other guys that are in the ballot now trickling into that ballot as their eligibility shrinks. And then you see some names kind of jumping in, maybe takes them a few more years. You know, see 2030, I just put Zack Martin and a couple holdovers from this year. And
Mhm.
then that's the math with 3. Even if you increase it to 4 moderns a year and you kind of do that scenario, you see some of these guys get in a little earlier. And yeah, I even snuck our good friend Eli Manning into the class of 2030. I
No,
was feeling
and you
generous,
know
but
what? But why not? Because I mean, he's already if he's a first
yeah,
ballot
yeah.
finalist. So
If
I
you're a
mean,
first ballot finalist, as our friend Jack has shown the data, you're going to get in. It's just a matter of how
right.
long you end up
And
waiting.
he's completely correct. Nobody who's ever been nominated in their first year, with the exception of Jim Tyrer,
Yeah.
and we already know the backstory on that. I'm going to do a shameless plug. I had the privilege of interviewing the man who's got an upcoming documentary
Mhm.
about that. So check that out.
Yeah,
That
it's
here
great.
at Buchnerverse. Oh, you saw that? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, you can play around with these scenarios, and the fact is, we have a lot of deserving guys as finalists now.
Hmm?
Of the 15 of those, only 3 were elected, so 12 will come back. And then if the map I showed before, the layout before I show, we've got a bunch of deserving first-time guys being considered in 2026, and then every year it just builds up. So it
Hmm?
just shows you the challenge you're facing when you have these smaller classes. It's a huge difference from many years when we were electing 5 moderns every year. The queues would build up, but they were quickly. Where it might take a guy 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 years to get in some cases, that's going to become more common and it's going to become longer. Guys who might have waited 5 or 6 years are now going to be waiting 7, 8, 9 years, unless, as we said, the hall does a self-correct that we think they may do because they're going to continue to get
Yeah.
criticism for the classes.
Well,
So.
they're all men like ourselves. We're not going to admit we're wrong right away. I know I don't.
All right, so who else do we have sitting out there as
Well,
that we haven't mentioned as possible contenders for 2030?
Well, how about 2029? Because you and I have engaged your
Yes.
thoughts on
Yep. So that's a good point.
on two people here who called their retirement.
Yep.
Because you asked if I want to talk about it, and I do because we haven't, and there's no reason to get more opinions on that. I love these conversations. They're two very big names. Both of them are Hall of Fame worthy, but we'll start off with the first person who faces the hardest position now to get in, and that's Julio Jones. Julio Jones might have retired only last month, but he's eligible for the class of 2029. Paul, do you have a 2029 graphic, or you only prep to 2030?
No, I have it in there. I can grab
Do
it.
you really? That's awesome.
Well, no, I just have the list.
Oh no, I thought you had a graphic like behind you of with the cap.
Oh no, I
yeah.
didn't prep for that one.
So Julio is another. You talked about all decades. He either would be considered the best wide receiver of the decade, or it's Antonio Brown. And Antonio Brown, we know the issues that he brings to the table. Julio doesn't have those, except for one big thing that to me is a minor red flag. Maybe it's fuchsia flag. I don't know. It's not that red. His touchdown production is only 65. Is that a big deal? Can that cost him? He was the biggest producer. He was consistent. He got you your first downs. He was first. He won a receiving title. Was it one or two?
Yeah, I think
okay. One. I think it was one where he led the league in receptions and one in receiving yards. But he's a wide receiver. We've seen Torrey Holt struggle to get in. Hines Ward can't get past the semifinals. And again, I'm going to say this for the 18th time. Hines Ward will go 20 for 20. He will be a semifinalist every year, and he will never be a finalist. Not because he's not good, but because there's just a lot of people who have come up the pipeline who are better.
Yeah, and this has been the wide receiver challenge, which has resulted in this logjam, has been persistent for several years. And there's guys, you mentioned a couple of them right there, that have been caught up in this challenge voters have. Now, again, they favor the position. So when you look at the recent, semifinal lists of 25 the last several years, you look at the finalist lists of the final 15, there's always a number of wide receivers in those groups. So they're, as a group, they're kind of high profile. Their stats kind of jump out at you. The challenge the voters constantly continue to face is when they're there as a group, if there's 3 or 4 of them, for example, in the final 15, how do you separate out the difference between when the stats are similar? And we've seen them be slow. And Calvin Johnson jumped in, got elected. Andre Johnson has. But as you mentioned, we got a guy in Torrey Holt and Reggie Wayne and a couple other guys who were just Steve Smith Jr. is now in that group that are just sort of lingering there. Now, Holt has moved along. He's been in the final 10, and last year he was in the final 7, which is the second to last group that's considered. So he was voted on and could have been elected, but I think the small class numbers cost him. But he's there, so he's probably ready. But he's been on that ballot a number of years and has been a finalist and advanced to that second to last stage each of the last few years. And yet he can't kind of get over that hump. And it's just a problem where they're all coming out of that era of the 2000s and the into the 2010s, when the whole league is focused on passing, the rules, the strategy, the quarterback, all of that, and they're all clustered in there. And what happens, I think, with the voters is it becomes not who is better, but who has a little bit of it, like you say, a red flag or a little bit of a crimson flag that they can kind of say, we're going to set this guy aside. So they ding him for something very little just to figure out how do we rank these 4 or 5. And I think that you've pointed exactly the challenge. I think Julio Jones will get elected, but I anticipate even if the classes get expanded a little bit and we start getting maybe we can see 4 moderns a year, that would be an improvement. Well, what happened this year? He's still going to have to wait because he's going to fall in that queue and they're going to look for a distinction. And many of these other players have a few more accolades, although his are very good, and a few more numbers, although his are very good. But his peers are in that kind of grouping with the 900 to 1,000 receptions. Like you said, he has fewer TDs than others. He has All Pro, he has the Pro Bowls, he has the All Decade. But so do these other guys we've been talking about in terms of the wide
Right.
receivers.
Mm-hmm.
And then to make his challenge even harder is another guy is going to join the ballot. And we talked to him a little earlier, who
Mm-hmm.
we think is going to be fast tracked right, if not first ballot, second ballot at the wide receiver position. And that's Larry Fitzgerald, who
Right.
has all the kudos and numbers, and actually would be kind of surprising, I think, to many folks that he was not first ballot along
Well,
with
not necessarily with Julio, right? Because you're saying that Larry's going to take the spot of either Holt or Wayne. Okay.
yeah, but yeah, and so it just kind of it makes that logjam just drag out.
Yeah.
And
And
then by the time Julio Jones gets on there, some of those guys will be out.
Antonio
But
Brown will
still,
be there already waiting.
yes, and there'll still
Yeah.
be some other guys
Hmm.
probably in that queue. And if you combine that with the smaller class sizes, and the reality is there are a lot of good, deserving, qualified players at other positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be tough. Even though I think if somebody just stepped out and looked at Julio Jones's resume and said he's a Hall of Famer, I think all of us would agree. But it doesn't mean he's going to be first ballot.
I don't think he is going to be first ballot. I think somewhere in our little chat group that we have believe it's good. I think most of us think it's going to be within 5, but it's not. It wouldn't be a surprise if it's not. It's very, very possible. And again, we are not belittling the career of Julio Jones whatsoever. I think it's more of
Yeah.
just how everything is getting more and more congested. And probably the best thing that might have happened to wide receivers for the Hall this year in 2024 was the return of the running game.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know that Derrick Henry's great year, or Saquon Barkley's great year, to have 2 great running backs have those monster years. I think if you would have told us in 2023 that would never happen again, we might believe it. I might have bought it. Yeah. But
Yeah, so we might start to see a shift where the league isn't dominated, where we have multiple wide receivers putting up massive numbers year after year. Some of them certainly still will, but there may be more of a balance in the league in terms of offensive play calling and performance that might again swing that pendulum a little bit off the wide receivers. And we just have to see. And he's first ballot in 2029, but we don't know what receivers might show up on the ballot. Well, he has to wait a few years. We just
right.
don't know who else is on that ballot. And to be honest with you, a guy like Zack Martin is probably in a better position right now. As of right now, he is really the top sole contender for the class of 2030 for first ballot because there aren't any other guys yet who are serious contender for first ballot. That kind of goes back to that conversation. It's about numbers. It's about who's returning on the ballot. And first ballot is also who else is first ballot contender.
Yeah.
And we just sold some of those years when we've got 2 or 3. 2030 so far doesn't have that, but that might change.
Well, there's another name I'd like to go through. Patrick Peterson.
Yeah.
Started his career with 8 Pro Bowls. Might have had a 9th. He didn't start off. When did he get it? No, he had a PED suspension to start off year 9, and he was never the same after that. He was basically a shell after that. So we're looking at his career almost based on those 8 years.
Yeah,
he didn't play last year, so he's also first ballot eligible in 29. Peterson, as good as he was, does not scream first ballot. He doesn't even scream first 5 years. Though I love it. I think he's another great player. What do you think?
I think he falls in that category where he's got some of the, as we say, checks the boxes, right? He's an all-decade player, He has some All-Pro. He has the Pro Bowls. Doesn't have a huge number of career interceptions, but for the era he played in,
We look at
um,
that differently. Darrell Revis, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly. And I think most people, when they look at the era, like you said, his peak years in the 2010s, they would view him as being third or fourth best
and was all
quarterback.
decade, right? He got an all
Yeah,
decade,
yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
he's in that
Yeah.
group.
Mhm.
But again, it's kind of like I said before, he's going to end up on a ballot, and that 2029 ballot is already pretty full. And they're going to look at all those cases, and he very well has a good shot. He'd be a semifinalist, maybe he makes a finalist, but he's going to linger there because he just has a few weaknesses on that resume. Just not because I don't think anybody thinks he doesn't get in the hall. It's just that he may be set aside for players who individuals feel are on the ballot or will be showing up in 2030 and 2031 that will make him wait. And by the way, folks, just so you don't think we understand how it works, we do. When you announce your retirement, doesn't make any difference to the Hall of Fame. What they look at is when you
When you
last
retired,
played.
which
They
is why
don't
Julio is
care when you
29.
announce it or when you put in your papers or
Yeah.
whatever, or what ceremonies or whatever you do.
Mhm.
So in the case of from him, Julio, they
Yeah.
didn't play last year, and that counts as their first of their 5 years waiting period, and hence after the season of 2028, they're eligible, which means they're eligible for the class of 2029,
Mhm.
and not to be confused because yeah, it doesn't matter. They just count seasons not played towards their 5 year waiting period, and that's why he falls in that group.
Let's go back to 2030 or go forward to 2030. And there's one name we haven't said who I think might be done. Uh, that's Von Miller. We haven't talked about him. I don't know that you and I have ever talked about him.
No, we probably haven't. He hasn't been on our
Yeah.
radar because he's continued to play. But he's a man without a team as of right now. There was some thought when free agency opened there in the middle of March that a few teams might be looking at him. I don't think his years as a primary starter and a
Well, that's
pass
done.
rusher probably passed. Although he
Yeah.
played very well in a limited number of games and snaps last year, which means as a role player and a backup, he might have, and as a he might have an opportunity this coming season. It's very possible that teams are going to wait till after the draft, look at their depth, maybe work through training camp, injuries, this sort of thing. He's the kind of guy who seems like he wants to continue to play, and he would be a nice fit, maybe back in Denver or maybe another team. I don't think the Cowboys are interested. They're building up some other depth at defensive end and pass rusher, but he might find himself a home. But we just don't know. And as of right now, he's out there and he doesn't seem to be interested in retiring. He is looking, and he may get a shot back on a roster, and that would postpone his retirement, obviously, in his eligibility. But he's a
Right.
guy, when you look at the numbers, he's got it. I mean, he's a Super Bowl MVP. He's multiple All-Pro, Pro Bowl. He's way up there in the career sack stats.
Mhm.
He's an all-decade team. I mean, he checks all the boxes. He in his peer and in his time as in his career, he's probably among the top pass rushing specialists, and he sort of has all of that. So he would be a legitimate first ballot contender, and certainly will be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's just that his eligibility hasn't started yet. It
Right.
might, because he may not play this year, and all of a sudden he would become
Mhm.
eligible if he never played again. But we don't know that yet.
Yeah. Well, that also would be interesting to see. And then I guess we have the final possibility. And we thought maybe we're going to get an answer on that the last week. Oh, that's everyone's favorite quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, a guy who I think throughout the 2010s, if you were not a Patriot or a Saint fan, you wanted him as your guy. And
Oh
even then,
yeah,
you might
yeah.
think that he might have been better. I know that he got the nod over Drew Brees, and stat wise, I could see why for that slot. Saying that, Aaron Rodgers wants to keep playing. Aaron Rodgers was last season. It's clear that the magic is gone. He's 41. 41, 42.
I think you're right.
I mean, either way, there's only one Tom Brady. And that's sort of like why he's the unicorn of quarterbacks. And Aaron Rodgers is that one person that gets a lot of, I think, undeserved criticism. There's a lot of people. Is he a guy I want to hang out with? No. Some of his beliefs may not jive with mine, but I don't know that he's not because he doesn't share the same belief system that I do. Maybe because I don't know that he can articulate why. I'm not, I like a good conspiracy, but not somebody who believes in every conspiracy.
Right.
I don't have a problem with what he said. Well, I'm, what did he say? I'm immunized.
Yeah.
And the press went all over him because they got tricked. Let's be blunt. You got tricked. So of course you're going to shit all over him. And I don't even hold that against him because here we are 4 years later and I don't even know where my vaccine card is, Paul. If I had to prove that I got the jab, I don't know that I could. So that's a story for another time that you and I don't want to get into on camera. But where I'll defend Rodgers as much as he's gotten attacked a lot from the media. I've never seen one teammate, with the exception of Brett Favre, whose job he wanted, dump on him. Have you?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That, his talent, his skills, he beat up my Cowboys a number of times in critical key games, including the playoffs.
Yep.
He didn't win he just won the one Super Bowl, so that's kind of a ding on it. But otherwise, he is in that group of top quarterbacks in the era he played, and all of the stats and everything align with that. Now, again, last season, not so much. The Jets thought he would be the difference maker. That one didn't work out. The Jets had a variety of other issues, not just a quarterback.
Right.
And they unceremoniously essentially dumped him
Mm-hmm.
and moved on, which was probably a good decision for them trying to build a team there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he felt that maybe there'd be a lot of interest in the league of teams because there always is a team. It only takes one team to say, hey, we need a veteran quarterback, a guy who's going to take us over the top, maybe make that into the playoff and a playoff run. Could be that one key thing we're missing. There's always a team like that in the league. There are other teams who just need a quarterback. Well, I don't blame a guy like Aaron Rodgers who's like, I don't want to play for a team who just needs a quarterback, right? I want to go to a place where I can be part of a difference maker and get that team into the playoffs. And really, as the quarterback shuffle has occurred this offseason and free agency, he sort of was named and he was out there, but then very quickly kind of fell off most people's radar. And all of a sudden, these other jobs got filled by other players. And really, when the music stopped, there were really only two chairs left. And they're both kind of reluctant.
Yeah.
That is the Vikings and the Steelers. It seems like he wants to play for the Vikings. He sort of made that a public kind of view. But the Vikings don't seem to share. They're ready to go with their rookie from last year who was injured and not really looking for a veteran to take over that team. The Steelers, interestingly, had a number of options at quarterback from last year, veteran players, two of which they just either slow or didn't really take much interest in, and those guys, of course, have moved on. And they have met with Rodgers a few weeks ago and talked. So they've had some initial conversations, but there doesn't seem to be any immediate movement there. Again, maybe the Steelers are looking after the draft. Maybe they're thinking about how they're building their team. Maybe they wonder whether he's the right fit or not. Or maybe this is all the fact that Aaron Rodgers just can't make up his mind, right? Does he want to play? Does he not? And last season, right, he joined the Jets. He wasn't in the offseason. He didn't go to training camp.
Mm-hmm.
There were some questions there that he wasn't all in. And I don't know, especially if you're the Steelers, I'm thinking you want a guy that's going to commit, build what you need in that team. You're just not going to walk in the last, week before the season and suddenly become the guy. I don't think most teams and organizations want a new quarterback, veteran quarterback, to come in. They would rather have them there prepping in the offseason training camp. Not sure whether Aaron Rodgers wants to make that kind of commitment. That could be a difference of opinion between the two of them. But as we record this today, he's still sitting out there with an unknown future. Now, Kurt, if I was a betting man, and I'm largely not, I would think my guess would be that he will not play this season. but he won't retire. Now, I suspect maybe somebody in a panic, maybe the Steelers, maybe it's somebody else who gets a veteran injured, which can happen. They need to go out there and get a guy. They might go after him late training camp, and he may bite at that opportunity for a 1 year deal. I think the other, as I said, as a betting man, I would more think he's going to wait a year and then try to find a spot a year from now where he's a year older, a year wiser. I don't know. Healthier. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not younger.
Yeah.
But that might be his mindset. He doesn't strike me. And if he retires, right? Let's say he does. Maybe he's been spending too much time talking to his former colleague Brett Favre, who whiff-waffed between retirement and playing multiple times at the end.
For years.
Maybe that's where he's getting his his late career advice in terms of, well, take your time, look at your options.
Maybe inspiration. I bet they don't talk.
I know they probably don't, but the parallels there are pretty fascinating, actually.
Oh, especially if he goes to the Lions and the Vikings.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
so we'll have to see about that. But I guess for us, if last season was his last season, and he doesn't play this year and next or whatever, and he ends up retiring, he is the first ballot guy in the class of 2030. That will be no question at all. The off-season stuff, the attitude, the kind of media presence, which he gets a lot of pushback from. All that's irrelevant to the voters.
Well, even if it is relevant, though, Paul, I think even if it is relevant to some of the voters, you can't deny it.
No,
I mean, because the resume is just too strong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a little different conversation than Antonio Brown in terms of the impact and the player and on the field and all of that, even though a guy, again, with really strong credentials in a career resume. When it comes to Aaron Rodgers, you just look at the numbers and the career accomplishments. Multiple MVP. Just that alone means the voters are not going to give that any kind of pause. Even if there were a bunch of contenders to be first ballot in the class of 2030, he'd be at the top of any list at this point.
I think also with Rodgers, it's a little bit different than it was for him a few years ago. He was dating all the Hollywood celebrities. I don't know who he's dating now, but he was in that periphery. Yeah. He had that Jeopardy host job. I forgot all about that, but I'm rewatching The Connors after rewatching Good Times. Apparently I'm into some blue collar porn here. I don't know. But so there was an episode there where he guessed when Jackie, the character, was on that. So that window, though, is over. He won't be touched. He's made too many Hollywood enemies, right or wrong, doesn't matter. He's not going to go into broadcasting either.
No, I don't think so, but he's going to go in the podcast world and he's going to be very successful. He's going to make money.
Maybe not.
I think he still has
Michelle Obama's podcast is bombing.
Yeah. I think there's probably still a space, but you're right. I think he'd try to move into the popular media as a celebrity and kind of building roots for a post-career. Again, I don't want to use exact parallel, but a guy like Michael Strahan, right, that sort of jumped right into that and became much right off his career, right, got into media, sports media.
But Aaron Rodgers doesn't have that charisma.
Exactly.
He never did.
That's why I said I didn't want to make it a direct comparison, but it was just the idea that a player preparing for a career in media and as a celebrity, that we see that players do it and try to do it, but they more often just it doesn't work out. And there's a lot of examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But he was clearly trying to set the groundwork for that. But you're right. It seems like maybe it's sort of bypassed. We'll have to see. But and that may be part of his struggle. Do I retire and pursue those, or do I play longer? It's not about money at this point. I think it's just ego and prestige. Can I get another team into the playoffs and get to another Super Bowl? Because very few quarterbacks have done that to win multiple or even get teams. I mean, Kurt Warner did, and of course Brady did and won. But that's probably the only thing left on his resume to try to think, can I do this in the right situation? We don't think he can. We don't
Yeah,
think he has the
no,
skill set
I
and the
think
health.
what you said is bang on. Where he's gonna waffle for a while, and I think just like teams are waffling on him.
Yeah.
And again, much as I just find him a weird dude, I wish him the best. I hope
Yeah.
whatever happens, it goes his way. I got no reason not to say that. It's you can find career parallels, but not personality parallels. I
Yeah.
can't think of somebody
Yeah.
whose public perception has taken such a pounding over, I don't want to say minor things, but just a compilation of,
Yeah. It's just galvanized and
yeah,
just divided, and that sort of thing doesn't work very well when you're trying to get into a broad-based media career where you need to kind of not be controversial and try to, keep everybody's have a high profile. Everybody loves you and likes you. That's not his personality or his approach. And as you
I
mentioned earlier,
respect.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in terms of what you mentioned earlier for
Yeah.
physical talent and abilities, people need to remember, again, just based on
Mm.
physical attributes and skill set, Tom Brady was a historic anomaly for a
Mm-hmm.
guy to play at such a high level for a long career, change teams in his 40s and lead them to a Super Bowl and play at a high level. We are seeing quarterbacks play longer and having some success, but he is really an anomaly, not, I don't think, something that is a trend that we're going to see. And again, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or some of these other veteran quarterbacks still in the league, and Matthew Stafford, and some of these others, it's not always going to work that way just because it worked for, in this case, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady. From a physical attributes, health, skill set,
Mm.
it was such a unique thing that people think, are we going to see more of that? Players playing at a high level late in their career with great success? The answer is no.
Yeah, yeah. He's literally built different.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
How he
this,
approaches the game
yeah.
and everything about it, the skill sets are much, much different. And
Mm.
then Brady, there's a lot there, and the luck and opportunities, all that kind of played into it. But it's not something we can expect that a lot of players, once they get over the age of 40, can really continue to be successful at a high level, especially quarterbacks.
Yeah. Well, that's a bit of a preview here of the 2029-2030 Pro Football Hall of Fame that Paul and I will discuss probably 1,000 more times, a few of which on camera over the next half decade. Maybe we'll do that in person now that I'm not, because I'm afraid to cross the border back home, but that's another story, or come back. Anyway, no politics, we said. I kind
There we go.
of treaded that line a little bit. So I'm going to tread right back out. With that, wherever you are, wherever you may be, make today count. Check out everything else that we're doing here in the Buchnerverse. We're being a lot more active on our videos. I'm even doing a show where I read your comments. Some of you are not very nice to me.
But you're a public celebrity, Kurt.
No, I'm a public figure.
Public figure, yes.
Yes.
And they still treat you with disdain and disrespect. Some of them.
Ah, who knew? Apparently, the bar for to be a public figure is so goddamn low.
Plus, it just makes you a target for any reason because you're just a target.
Yeah. As I'm here in my palatial estate.
Yeah. Up in the penthouse suite.
We're high up, but yeah. As the Jefferson said, I don't know that I necessarily moved up to a deluxe apartment in the sky, but it is an apartment in the sky.
There you go.
Yes. Take care, everybody.